Welcome to EngLearn. As many of you have requested, today we are looking at a sample commentary for the Frederick Douglass speech. If you haven't done so already, do take a look at our previous videos where we did an annotation of this speech and discussed planning and writing your commentary. The text of the speech and the commentary are both available on our website. The links are in the description below. I highly recommend reading through the commentary on your own to see whether you can identify key points and some positive and negative aspects of this student's work. Today, we will do an in-depth analysis of this commentary that will help you in writing your own for whatever text you get in the exam. Let's get started. Let's look at the introduction first. The student writes, "In this emotional and fierce speech, Frederick Douglass addresses his audience, which consists of mostly privileged white men, and attempts to persuade them that slavery is a cruel, inhumane practice that must be abolished. He does this using a very strong, emotional, direct, and in many instances ironic tone that reflects his frustration and the frustration of his people with the current situation. He tries to achieve his purpose by using a wide variety of language devices, including positive and negative word choice, contrast, direct address, use of inclusive and exclusive personal pronouns, personal anecdote, and metaphor." We see that the student is immediately engaging with the text, identifying its major aspects, tone, purpose, and audience, in the very first sentence. The student wastes no time repeating obvious information that is already mentioned in the task, and gets right to the point. As we read the first sentence, we can see that the tone, purpose, and audience are identified in detail and precisely. First, the tone is identified as emotional and fierce. This idea is later developed in more detail in the second sentence, where the student says that the tone is strong, emotional, and direct. These expressions are somewhat vague, but ironic is definitely more precise. And the student also identifies the feeling of frustration, which is very specific, and he does well as he mentioned that this is his frustration and the frustration of his people, meaning Douglass in this speech acts as a representative of his people and not just as an individual. Going back to the first sentence, we can see that the way the student identifies audience is also very precise. He does not say that the audience are white people, but privileged white men, meaning the student understands the audience are people in power. Finally, the purpose is also identified in detail. The student doesn't merely say that the purpose of the text is to persuade. That would leave us with the question of persuade who, of what. The student answers these questions that naturally appear in our minds by saying to persuade them that slavery is inhumane, cruel practice that must be abolished. In doing this, the student correctly identifies that the speech looks not only to the past, condemning slavery as inhumane, but also looks to the future and calls the audience to action, to abolish slavery. If this was further elaborated on in the response, it would have had an even better impact of not just identifying the audience purpose and tone, but analyzing them from the very outset. Nevertheless, the introduction provides an excellent framework for what is to come. This is specifically important in the last sentence of the introduction, where the student is paving way for his further analysis in the rest of the essay. He says, he tries to achieve his purpose by using a wide variety of language devices, including positive and negative word choice, contrast, direct address, use of inclusive and exclusive personal pronouns, personal anecdote, and metaphor. This final sentence of the introduction, often called a thesis statement, provides a clear roadmap for analysis in the rest of the commentary. The student here established firm foundations for the structure of his essay. He enumerated the language devices he would comment upon in the rest of the essay in order in which he would analyze them. This makes the structure very well organized and easy to follow. I do need to mention here that this is not official advice and that most sample commentaries do not follow such a structure. I simply personally like it because it's very clear and focused. Structurally, the essay is very well constructed. As we shall see later on, it is cohesive and divided into coherent paragraphs, and every paragraph deals with either a single idea or two or more connected ideas. Organization definitely gets high marks here. One thing that I will point out as a drawback though, and we will be going back to this as we read on, is that almost all the devices mentioned in this last sentence of the introduction, which will later be analyzed, are language devices. which poses a big question of what the student has done to analyze form and structure in the text. Form and structure are important elements of the task and must not be ignored. As we shall see, there are occasional comments made on the structure, but it would definitely be better if the student made form and structure analysis more obvious and explicit. Moving on to the first paragraph of the main part, the student begins his analysis by tackling the first language device he mentioned in the thesis statement: positive word choice. Let's read. One of the most prominent characteristics of the speech is the use of positive nouns and adjectives to denote the privilege and power that whites enjoy and the African Americans are denied. We find examples throughout the first part of his speech where he speaks of blessings, rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence, sunlight, light, and healing. The purpose of these words is to show that these great values are reserved only for the whites and that there is immeasurable distance between the whites and the blacks. Another excellent structural device is the fact that the student begins his paragraph with an introductory sentence that gives us a very clear idea of what the paragraph will be about. This is called a topic sentence, and every paragraph should have one. It's usually located at the beginning of the paragraph, but that doesn't have to always be the case. Looking at the content of the commentary, the first sentence provides a very precise point of analysis, positive adjectives and nouns, and the effect of their use, to denote the privilege and power. By the way, see how the student cleverly uses alliteration and contrast here? That's proof of his command of language and leaves a good impact. It's by no means obligatory, but if you do choose to use language devices, remember that your style should be formal and objective, so don't veer into using metaphors and personification. You need to stick to literal meanings and leave figurative language for the writing section. Back to the point here. The first sentence identifies the point and the effect, and the second sentence offers several aptly selected examples. The quotes are appropriately short, and even the one that is longer is very focused and precise. One thing that can be commented on as a kind of a negative is that quotes are simply listed at the end of the sentence, without fitting into the analysis itself. Compare that to how well the immeasurable distance is embedded into the text of the commentary in the next sentence. Embedding quotes into your own analysis is an important skill, and I hope we will have a video on that at some point. Until then, remember, fitting your quotes naturally into the commentary is better than merely listing them. Finally, the last sentence of the paragraph expands further on the effects of the use of positive nouns and adjectives. The paragraph follows a very clear PEE structure. While you should always include effects of the device used, always following the structure in the same order can be a bit repetitive, and you should aim to provide further commentary and deeper analysis too. As we mentioned in our last video, making sure your ideas flow naturally in your commentary is very important, and how the student connects this paragraph to the next one is an excellent example of that. Let's read. In stark contrast with these positive words stand all the negative attributes that are linked with the situation of the African Americans, such as gross injustice and cruelty, victim, stripes, and death. These negative attributes are often placed very close to the positive words used to describe the position of the whites, which immediately creates images of contrast in the reader's mind. Your celebration is a sham. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your sermons, impiety and hypocrisy. Look at the first part of this sentence. In stark contrast with these positive words. Here, the student very clearly links what he already said to what he is about to say. This is an excellent linking device and you should absolutely use it. He then moves on to make his next point. Again, we have the PEE approach, and once again, although the quotations are very precise and well chosen, the student makes the mistakes of not embedding them properly. Another interesting thing about this paragraph is that he connects two language devices, negative attributes and contrast, in the same paragraph. This is excellent because they both indicate the same effect. There is also a hint of reference to structure here, where the student says, placed next to those positive words. But again, you need to make sure structure and form references are more explicit and clear, to show the examiner you're giving equal focus to form, structure, and language. A better way to address this is to say, for example, placing negative attributes very close to positive words has a very important structural purpose in the text. It immediately evokes images of contrast in the reader's mind. This way, it is clear that the student understands this is a structural device. Moving on now. Throughout the text, Douglass directly addresses his audience, often posing very difficult and provoking questions. These questions are especially prevalent in the first part, whereas the second part of the text answers some of them. Perhaps the most important of these questions is, what to the American slave is the 4th of July? That very strongly questions the purpose of him, as a former slave, being invited to speak at such an event, and is an introduction into his very direct and harsh analysis of the hypocrisy of the privileged whites. This effect is also achieved through the use of sarcasm in the first paragraph, where he asked if he was called to express devout gratitude for the independence his people clearly are not part of. Again, the student connects two similar language devices, direct address and rhetorical questions. Now, there is a more explicit and very insightful reference to the structure of the text, where the student says, "These questions are especially prevalent in the first part, whereas the second part of the text answers some of them." This is an excellent way of showing the examiner you understand how particular language and structural devices are linked to the text as a whole. After establishing those whole text connections, the student makes the smart decision of focusing on one particular question to further dissect its purpose. That enables him to thoroughly analyze the particularities of the text. Again, the same effect is used to link this device to another one, use of sarcasm, with excellent embedding of quotes. The next paragraph again begins with reference to the previous one, which helps maintain cohesion. In close connection with the author directly addressing his predominantly white audience is his use of pronouns. He makes a very clear distinction between himself and his audience by constantly referring to them as you, mentioning your celebration, your greatness, your prayers. This stark contrast between himself and the other African Americans on the one hand and the whites on the other hand is most starkly represented in the short and impactful sentence at the end of paragraph 2. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. The student references the use of pronouns, again following a very clear PEE pattern. The use of pronouns is important in virtually every speech, especially those with political connotations. But you must make sure to avoid quoting just you, me, them, and instead offer more context, as in the example of your celebration, your greatness, your prayers. Again, the student moves on from the use of pronouns in the whole text and hones in on one particularly impactful sentence, which enables him to examine the use of pronouns more closely. It would perhaps be beneficial if he added a sentence or two of further analysis of the significance of this sentence for the entire text. Moving on now. While for the most part the author speaks of the general struggle of his people, towards the end of the text we get a peek into his own life, where he relates a personal anecdote of his own experience of slave trade. Here too we see a reference to his mistress, who hated the abuse of slaves and sympathized with me in my horror. This is perhaps a very subtle reference to the idea that other whites too can look up to her example and understand how cruel slavery is. Here is a structural reference again, where the student appropriately notes the shift in focus from the general struggle of Black people to a more personal account. Any kind of development or shift in focus or examining similarities or contrasts between particular elements of the text falls under the category of structure and should definitely be included in your analysis. But again, I would recommend making those references more explicit. You don't want to leave the examiner guessing whether you've understood it's a structural element or not. You want to make sure everything you know is clearly understood by the examiner. Again, the student discusses the issue of the personal anecdote, but focuses on one particular aspect. In this case, as we've seen in our annotation, there were many other elements to comment on, but no commentary will ever cover all aspects of the text. I do think, however, that some of the issues from this part of the text should have been discussed in more detail. Another thing we can note here is the use of a hedging device, perhaps, where the student is being tentative about presenting his interpretation of the words used. This is good, because no interpretation is definitive and the use of expressions such as "it seems," "the author implies," or "it might be that" is recommended. The next paragraph again begins with reference to the previous one. In other instances in the text, though, the author is much more direct. He does not give unclear allusions, but very straightforward, direct, and aptly strong messages. His tone throughout most of the text is that of frustration and rage, and he does indeed, as he says he wishes to, pour fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. He uses the metaphor of natural disasters, fire, thunder, storm, whirlwind, earthquake, to denote that the changes that must happen are of tectonic proportions and absolutely urgent. Here, the student discusses the tone of the paragraph, but does so in a very precise manner, focusing on particular language devices, the metaphor of natural disasters. The choice of quotations is very good, and I especially like how the student demonstrates his own language prowess by using the term tectonic, from the same semantic field as other words used in the text. Using Douglass's own words to describe his tone is also an excellent approach. Finally, the student provides a clear and succinct conclusion. Through his use of a variety of different language devices, Douglass paints an impressive and somber image of America at the time, one of deep divisions and stark inequality. His speech is an alarming call to end the injustice to his people and a fierce answer to those who aim to prolong it. As we've mentioned before, the conclusion is not mandatory, but in this case it helps the student reiterate his understanding of the purpose of the speech. It also provides the student with a good opportunity to demonstrate his language skills, with low-frequency vocabulary like somber, fierce, prolong, and excellent grammar. Overall, the essay was rather effective in its analysis of different language devices. There are definitely some points for improvement, especially concerning the discussion of form and structure. What did you think of it? How close was it to your own ability of writing? If you want, you can go to the Cambridge International link in the description below and try to grade this essay according to the official mark scheme. That exercise usually helps students better understand how examiners mark commentaries and will help you get a clearer idea on how you are being marked. If you have any questions, ask in the comments below or send me an email. If my videos are helpful, please like, subscribe, and share them with your friends and teachers. Happy exam season, everyone!